like to just make few announcements. Kindly mute your audio and switch off the video. Questions can be asked on the chat box. And also we've shared the link for YouTube and Facebook. In case your friends are not able to connect with us over Zoom, please forward them the details. They shall be in touch with us with YouTube and Facebook. Good evening to all the participants. This is Dr. Alisha Lodha, co-founder of Trio Physiotherapy Clinic and Rehab Center. Our today's webinar topic is What is not a cerebral palsy? A therapist perspective. Our speaker for today's webinar is Dr. Sanjay Parmar. I would also like to introduce you to our panelists for today and also our co-partners at Trio Physiotherapy Clinics, Dr. Hiral Jain and Dr. Suraj Shukla. Here is a brief introduction about Dr. Sanjay Parmar. He's done his undergraduate from Manipal University, master's from Rajiv Gandhi University, and completion of postdoctorate fellowship from University of Manitoba, Canada in 2017. He's certified as NDT therapist from USA, SI therapist from USA, and also certified as craniosacral therapist since 2014. He has an experience of more than 15 years in clinical and academics. More than 30,000 sessions of clinical handling experience in children with special needs. He's also done 35 publications as primary author in national as well as international journals. Not only this, he's conducted workshops and presented keynotes addresses on children with special needs at more than 50 occasions. He's guided 20 plus PG dissertations, also recognized PhD guide at SDM University and expert external advisor for University of Manitoba. He's got currently 2 international projects in hand. He's also presented views regarding Physiotherapy Council at Center in Allied Health Council Bill 2018 in front of Standing Committee of Rajya Sabha at New Delhi. He's also a senior advisory member of Rajasthani Physiotherapy Association. Over to you, Dr. Sanjay.
So we start the today's topic. I also thank Dr. Mahesh Kamte who has helped me in this particular presentation. He is a pediatric neurologist at KLE's Hospital, Belgaum. And my co-authors, my MPT students who are presently working with me, Lakshita, Saili, Disha, Swapnali, Padmavati, and Hemal. They are all the postgraduate students. What we are going to discuss today is about what is developmental delay, okay? And we are trying to focus, as a therapist, we are trying to focus on more of motor developmental delay. And then we are going to talk about how to make a diagnosis of motor developmental delay, and are we actually looking into the motor developmental delay, or are we just looking into the cerebral palsy risk factors, or are we following in something called as all or none law? And as a therapist, what we should look for, and why a diagnosis is important as a therapist, and what is really deriving a treatment when we treat a child with cerebral palsy or a neurodevelopmental disorder? Is it a diagnosis which we are treating, or is it a symptom which we are treating? And I will end my discussion with giving you some conclusion as a home message. So the biggest problem of the understanding of pediatric physiotherapy with the population is they think that pediatric physiotherapy is equal to neurology. That means they categorize the pediatric physiotherapy under neurology, and under neurology they categorize only as a cerebral palsy. So they consider pediatric physiotherapy is equivalent to cerebral palsy, and most of the places pediatric physiotherapy is not considered as an independent entity. Instead, they have pushed, like in one of the bag, we try to push so many things like that. They have pushed the pediatric component of CP. That's where the therapist is considered only as a CP therapist rather than considering as a pediatric therapist. So here in a brief view, I would like to say that the pediatric physiotherapy does not only look after the neurological aspect. He does look after cardiac. He does look after respiratory. He does look after musculoskeletal system also. So let's come to the today's topic that we are going to look towards neurological aspects of a pediatric physiotherapy. So I give you a scenario here. Let's say a child comes to you. Now, I know that most of you as a therapist, you know that any child who comes to us comes with a developmental delay. Now, this particular developmental delay is how to say that it is delay. That's the biggest question. Now, it's very easy to say because when parents comes, they say, let's say in Hindi, if I have to tell you, they say that cha piche hai. So we convert it into the English saying that child is delayed. So is what is our diagnosis? That is what we are doing? Instead, a one step ahead as a therapist, what we look for is, because we are looking into the motor aspect of it, we look for it whether the child has really a motor delay in that. So what we do here is we try to evaluate a child on one of the accepted tool which we have studied here on Peabody Developmental Motor Scale and see whether the child has got a delay. So you can see here on the screen that the graph is down. That means he is falling below the normal. So now I will say that anything falls below the normal is abnormal, or anything falls below the normal or the curve is going to be abnormal. That is what we are doing, or we should be doing something else? Okay, so that's what I'm going to discuss in for consecutive slides. So if I look into that, a developmental delay as a definition, what it will be that is that developmental delay occurs when a child does not achieve a developmental milestone in comparison to peer of the same age range. Means what we are trying to do is, let's say a child comes to us with a 6-month-old child who comes to us. And then we say that he's not performing an activity which the 6-month-old child should do. So we call it as a delay. And we try to see that 6-month-old child should be doing an activity of a 6-month-old child. That's where we start intervening. So something we are looking towards treating a child with atypical development, keeping as a typical as a milestone, which is absolutely wrong, because a child with an atypical development has got a way of atypical development also. It's not that a child is going to develop typically. It's going to develop atypically. So it's very important that we understand what is atypical development rather than trying to understand what is really a typical development. A typical development can be a guide or just a reference point to say that the child is delayed. Since I'm a physical therapist, I'm more worried about motor aspect. So I would say child is delayed in motor developmental delay. Okay, so once I diagnose the motor developmental delay, then I go further and look into where is that delay is. So the today's notion is that everybody, whoever comes to developmental delay, are neurological. So a broader category comes as a neurodevelopmental disorders, and all the neurodevelopmental disorders are having a delay, or all the delays should be neurodevelopmental disorders. So here what we are following is that all the developmental delays are neurodevelopmental disorders, because we think that the neurological system only can cause delay, which may not be true in most of the cases also. So today we are not going to focus on that. We are going to focus only on neurodevelopmental disorders. Of that, one of the disorder is cerebral palsy. So if you see in a classical definition of neurodevelopmental disorder, it categorizes many disorders, and one of them is cerebral palsy, and not all of them. So we are going to discuss today about what is not cerebral palsy. And when I try to explain you what is not, I also tell you what it is. So we are going to learn both the aspect, whom to call CP and whom not to call CP. So if you look into the population, we have nearly 12 million children with these neurodevelopmental disorders, and which accounts almost for only 1% of that disability children gets access to the school. And the unfortunate part of it is that neurodevelopmental disabilities have been still not been an important concern for the government. That's another issue with the neurodevelopmental disabilities. So if I look into these neurodevelopmental disabilities into the broader categories, these are the prevalence rates what are having at CNS, spinal cord, or peripheral levels, or at muscular level. Again, today I'm going to discuss only about the CNS and briefly going about the cord and others. So you can see that cerebral palsy accounts for 2.5 to 3% per 1,000 live births, whereas syringomyelia is accounting almost up to 8.4%. Whereas muscular dystrophy, we have 1 in 3,500. So you can see that the prevalence of other disorders are also very, very high. So till now, the notion is developmental delay is equal to cerebral palsy. That is what is true. If I say yes, then you might say that no, because you said that developmental delay can be because of anything. But what we treat every developmental delay is on the basis considering it as a cerebral palsy. And that's where, as a therapist, I think we make a small amount of mistake there. We categorize all the motor developmental delays into cerebral palsy, which is not true. Then what is true? So to diagnose a motor developmental delay, I told you that delay can be diagnosed if it is below certain normalcy, and we can diagnose it by doing the investigation. So if I have to look into a very classical definition, which is given by DMCN in 2006 and 7, there are three very, very important component comes there. The first one, it's a group of permanent disorder. I repeat again, it's a group of permanent disorder. It's a disorder of movement and posture, and it causes limitation in the activity. And it's very important word I want to quote here is non-progressive disturbance, which is occurring to the developing brain. These three things are very, very important, which needs to be understood. What is added in the 2007 is that along with this, there also an effect to the sensation, perception, cognition, communication, and behavior. Now, if I have to ask you or tell you, what are we exactly doing? We consider the CP or diagnose the CP based upon first motor developmental delay. We diagnose by telling that the child is delayed, which even a mother is saying to us. First line, what I have written, diagnosis of motor developmental delay. Second, what we are always focused on is risk factors. We always write in our evaluation, okay, the child has birth asphyxia, child has seizure, so child has cerebral palsy. But if I look into the classical definition, it says that it is a disorder of movement and posture. 1. 2. It is non-progressive disturbance which has occurred to the developing fetal or infant brain. Am I looking into these two aspects? When I look into these two aspects also, and then confirm, then it is a cerebral palsy, then actually I am treating a cerebral palsy and not other. And that's where as a therapist, we only look into the movement and posture, how typically they look, and we categorize them directly into the cerebral palsy, and we make the diagnosis depending upon the risk factors. And these risk factors can be anything. We know the n number of risk factors now, and the most commonest our therapist tries to record is a birth asphyxia. Second one we record is seizure. Now, if you look into the literature, it is not necessary. I repeat again, it's not necessary that all the birth asphyxias will have a developmental delay. It's not necessary. Okay, but HIE3 maybe will land up into the developmental delay and may land up into the cerebral palsy, or some infections which have caused may land up into the cerebral palsy. But they are the one of the cause to diagnose the cerebral palsy and not the causes to diagnose the cerebral palsy. But unfortunately, we take it in our history that head lag or head control is not achieved. Child has a history of birth asphyxia, so child has a developmental delay, and so child is cerebral palsy, which is not always true. So what we do in a routine assessment, we take the history of the parents from the parents and we ask them, okay, how much and what was the prenatal, natal and postnatal history. Then we assess tone, then we assess range, and then we try to take them on a functional scale, diagnose them by using a standard objective evaluation scales like Peabody, Bailey scale, or any other scales, and we confirm that the child has a motor developmental delay. And if we diagnose it once and we wanted to see the functional outcome of it, we try to go toward GMF and other things. Now, I will tell you that the routine assessment is the key till today. In pediatrics, it is not how much you handle the child to assess, it is how good you look at the child. Because a lot of things a child will tell you with his or her movements, with his or her posture, with his or her behavior. You really need not to struggle to find out whether the really tone is increased. Even an attitude posture will tell you that. But as I said previously, that we try to diagnose immediately putting them under posture and movement. we need to reconfirm it that whether it is also a non-progressive lesion to the brain, which is not going to progress the disorder, then only I can say it is a cerebral palsy and not otherwise. So what we usually miss is the investigations to look upon to see whether it is something else and not only the CP. So what we try to do on a routine is moment we take this evaluation and we see these attitudes. For example, if one side of the body is affected, we call it hemiplegia. Lower limbs are affected, we call it diplegia. All four limbs are affected, we call it quadriplegia. Some movement dysfunction, we call it as a dyskinetic CP or ataxic CP or a dystonic CP. Now, let me tell you very openly that all of them, what you see is a movement and posture is one of the component of the definition and not the another two components of the definition. So I'm strictly adhering to the definition and telling that, okay, one of the component of the definition is fitting here. So he may be CP, I would say, and rather than saying he is a cerebral palsy. Now, when it's not a cerebral palsy, you will say that, okay, then what it is? Very important. I mean, very easily we look at the facial features and immediately we diagnose. If not CP, then it's Downs. This is another easy diagnosis which we make because the child has got a very typical features on the face and generalized hypotonia, which is very, very easy diagnosis. Now, let me tell you very openly or very frankly is that this particular diagnosis also can be done by any of them who is a layman, who is looking at the child's face and say that there is something wrong, and you as a physiotherapist or you as a clinician going to say, okay, this is a Down syndrome. So these two becomes a very quick gun for the therapist to say that it is cerebral palsy, and we miss out the another two components of that. That is, it is an insult which has occurred to the brain, which is non-progressive, and it has occurred during the time of the development. That's what we miss out. So what is very important to be add upon so that we restrict that it is a cerebral palsy and nothing else. So we really, really need to take the genetic evaluation. In genetic evaluation, I'm not asking that we are going to look towards their karyotyping or look towards their asking them to do a gene mapping. No, we are going to take a detailed history, a family history of developmental delay or intellectual disability. We are also not going to rule out or just not going to go with that or stop there. We are also asking our physician or a neuropediatrician to have us in a view about what is the present status about these other things like creatine phosphokinase test, screening of inborn error of metabolism, infections like TORCH, neuroimaging, and very important EEG. Because there can be a disorders related to actually a seizure, which is a treatable, and because of seizure, secondarily the child has gotten a developmental delay, and that's what we are treating. So maybe a seizure is the primary to be treated. With seizure improvement, the child might improve with the development also. So we need to look into these investigations which we are missing out. So coming to what then we should look for. So we should always look for, whenever you look for a child with cerebral palsy, whenever you look for a child with spastic attitude of the upper extremity, spastic attitude of the lower extremity, or overall spasticity in the body, do not immediately go on to the cerebral palsy. Think whether the child has fitting into the definition of all three. That one, whether the child has a damage to the brain, which was to the developing brain. Two, it's a non-progressive. Three, posture and movement is affected. Also, always keep in the mind that child may have this particular attitude because of the disorders which I've listed here. It may be neurotransmitter disorder, it may be ureocycle disorder, it may be leukodystrophy, it may be a serine deficiency, or it may be Krebs disease, which will represent like which will have a spasticity, and which may represent like a cerebral palsy, how a spastic cerebral palsy looks like. So I really need to look into these mimics, which can be them and not on a cerebral palsy. Now I'll just show you one of the example which I learned from is this child came to us at the age of 5 months. Okay. And she was not having a trunk control. She was sitting with an attitude of limb hypotonia, and she was having a typical upper extremity into the spasticity. An immediate diagnosis was made was a spastic quadricep, evolving spastic quadricep. Now, as I said that we did a detailed evaluation, we went into the investigations, and what we found about the child was the child had a hydrocephalus. You might debate saying me that even a CP has a hydrocephalus, but this child had hydrocephalus. This child had syringomyelia. This child had a mild lump on her back, and this child did not respond to pain as a stimuli when it is applied onto the lower extremity. So this child was actually suffering from neural tube defect, a classical neural tube defect, and she had Arnold-Chiari malformation type 2, which required actually a decompression. So me treating this particular child without considering as a spastic cerebral palsy or a CP quadriplegic for a period of time and not getting an outcome, probably the outcome was stuck because there was a compression in AST malformation. And then the child got operated, and then the things turned out in a different way. Similarly, we had another child coming to us. The immediate diagnosis was made was spastic quadriplegic because typically represented the child as a spastic quadriplegia. But the child was spastic quadriplegic because of Moyamoya syndrome, which is one of the rare syndrome to be seen, and actually it is a progressive. And we really did not see this child improving much because in this child, we had a lot of issues with the visual system, which we could not come over, so we did not get much outcome. And we have to accept it. Certain progressive disorders may not show you improvement as you expect in cerebral palsy. So if you would have been keep treating like a cerebral palsy, I would have got disappointed on every day that why my child is not improving. And when I look back, I know that yes, my child is not improving because child does not have CP and child has something else like a Moyamoya syndrome, which is progressive in nature. Similarly, we had one more child who was walking kind of mixed CP, is another terminology where you have some amount of spasticity, you have some amount of hypotonia, you have some amount of dyskinesia. So if you look at this picture, the child is walking with wide base of support, hyperextension at knee, some amount of high guard posture in the upper extremity. So the diagnosis went into the favor of mixed CP. But this child did not have a mixed CP. This child has a biotinidase deficiency. And once the drugs were given, the child really started responding much better to the therapy. And child was struggling. And when I saw all the old reports, everywhere it was written as a mixed CP, mixed CP, and mixed CP, which was actually not. Another child which we got at the age of 10 years with initial complaint was that the child is walking with some amount of dragging at the feet. So the mom was telling that no, the child walks with dragging of the feet. And when I saw him, he was walking perfectly. After a time, I told the mom that no, he's walking perfectly. Probably you are trying to look at the child more cautiously. So you are trying to find out problem. Then I told mom that please get the video of the child. And when we videoed the child, we saw that yes, the child was dragging on one of the leg. Then we went into the further detailed investigations of the child. And in a year of time, we saw that the child is actually walking like an spastic diplegic. My neuropediatrician referred for a genetic evaluation. And we got to a diagnosis that the child is having actually a genetic spastic paraplegia, which again, there are various types. I'm not going to discuss because I'm not a pediatric neurologist or an expert to diagnose this. But we got to know that SPG6 type 6, which is having a component of progressive, which is going to be progressively a little slow. But it is not, again, a cerebral palsy. So we did not miss it here. We could pick it immediately because there was a positive history for us that the child was absolutely normal. So the first component of the definition, child does not fit, that the damage has occurred to the brain of the developing brain. So it did not fit into the CP. So then not CP, so what it is, that's where we started investigating and we came to a conclusion within 6 months that the child has spastic paraplegia. Now similar things happens even with the dystonia. So in dystonia, you might have, because of IM, that is inborn error of metabolism. You may have Leishman disorders. You may have creatine deficiency. Okay. So it is not necessary again that dystonia is cerebral palsy. So here is another example. Similar way, a child represented to us with telling that child has a typical picture of dystonic features. But what mattered to us was child had a different, or you can say, a look on the face which was dysmorphic to us. And that's what raised the doubt on our routine evaluation. And when we evaluated the child for genetic evaluation, we got to know that the child has some abnormality on gene 63, chromosome 2, but still it is showing that it's a variant of uncertain significance. So I know that at least the child is not CP and he is having a genetic syndrome. So I do not really look into the child, how a child with spastic quadri dystonic would improve. Definitely not. Okay. Similar things happens with ataxia, and let me tell you one of the example which happened with me. I treated 2 children in the beginning of my practice in 2004-06, where I come across with the ataxic child who was 5-year-old. And when mom came and asked me, sir, when he will walk, he was standing with some amount of ataxia. And I told very, very confidently, it's ataxic CP. He's going to walk within a year. And trust me, I treated that child for 4 years and child did not walk. Because it wasn't CP. It was actually a spinocerebellar ataxia, which was missed right from the time day one. Definitely, we do not have much solution for spinocerebellar ataxia in the medicine also, but there are a lot of ataxias which can be treated medically and which you can get into the control while treating them in the therapy. Because child with ataxic cerebral palsy will have a different prognosis immediately. Okay. So here are certain slides which I want to show, and you can put it in your comment box that a figure 1 or child 1, what you're trying to see with the ring, a trunk is hypotonic, child is sitting with hypotonic trunk and trying to hold in a spastic way. Another picture you can see where you can see the child's hand, which is looking like a spastic in figure 2 and 3. So now I hope you must be thinking that let's not diagnose me that this particular child is hypotonic cerebral palsy, this particular child is hemiplegic cerebral palsy. Actually, the diagnosis of this child who is sitting in hypotonic attitude is a mitochondrial encephalopathy, which is also mimicking like an hypotonia there. And this particular child whom I'm showing with this component of cerebral palsy actually came to us with a diagnosis of Erb's palsy, because the child was typically keeping the hand like a policeman's tip hand in the behind, and that's where diagnosed as Erb's palsy. And when we looked into the finer component of the lower extremity, if you look at the lower extremity of this child, if it is visible to you, child is sitting in a kind of W sitting there. I mean, one of the limb has gone into the adduction, external rotation, and backward. And child showed that feature, and we raised the doubt that no, it's not an Erb's palsy. It's probably a child with dystonic hemiplegic cerebral palsy. And later on, within no time, we could confirm to the diagnosis that it is a hemiplegic cerebral palsy. So if I am doing this diagnosis, then you might ask me, as a physical therapist, you are going to treat them anyways with what they are representing. Why you want to diagnose them? I would say them that diagnosis will derive the treatment and treatment will derive the prognosis. And in some of the cases, diagnosis will derive the prognosis. So it's important that we diagnose it. Similar example of the child, you can see the upper extremity looking classical spastic. Again, the same child which I showed you with a neural tube defect. Now here I give you a question. Look at the upper extremity of this child and try to comment in your inbox, in your comment box, that what you think this child is having. Whether he is hemiplegic CP or he is not hemiplegic CP. I just leave it to you that to let me understand how much did you understand. Now another thing happens with us is whenever we see this particular classical sign, we diagnose immediately with a click that, sir, this is Down syndrome. This is muscular dystrophy and DMD. Let me tell you, ataxic cerebral palsy will also stand up like this. Because they look for a stability. So I'm just leaving one example to you. As I said, CP and what is not CP. Similarly, when you see this sign, which is very classical, because 3 diagnoses are very, very common by the therapist. 1, cerebral palsy. 2, Down syndrome. If 2 misses and child is standing like this, 3rd comes to muscular dystrophy. let me tell you very clearly, all three needs a different way of treatment. All three are entirely different. They do not have the similarity at all. So you might ask me, why are you struggling so much to explain us what is not CP? Because what is deriving your treatment? Is a diagnosis or is a symptom? So I will ask you, are we treating symptoms? You will say me, sir, whether it is because of Krebs disease or whether it is of ataxic spinocerebellar, I am going to treat a spastic hand with using CIMT, with using habit, with using NDT, with using n number of therapies what we have. Or if you are going to tell me that it is a muscular dystrophy, I am going to treat him with the strength training. So how does it changes if I know the diagnosis? I would say that if you're treating a symptom, you're diagnosing as a symptom. And if you're treating a diagnosis, you are treating with the treatment and not with the symptoms. So what is very important, or what is deriving what? Is it a diagnosis derives treatment and that derives prognosis? I would say that yes, diagnosis will derive the treatment and treatment will derive the prognosis. So all three are interlinked to each other. So here, for example, I have a diagnosis of hemiplegic cerebral palsy. My treatment is going to be based on treatment of hemiplegic cerebral palsy. I'm going to treat this child with CIMT because it shows a level 1 evidence for me. Or I'm going to treat the child with habit because it shows a level 2 evidence for me. And I know that the child with hemiplegic cerebral palsy will walk by 3 years maximum. So I know the diagnosis, I can derive the treatment, I can tell you the prognosis. But otherwise, if it is the child is because of spinal issues, because of neural tube defect, I wouldn't say that the CIMT will work for this child. So I do not treat the symptom, I treat the diagnosis. Based on that diagnosis, I derive the treatment, and already the prognosis are established for certain disorders or certain types of cerebral palsy. Already investigations are done and already the literature is available. So my diagnosis derives the treatment and treatment derives the prognosis. Let me tell you here one more thing is that it's not that if you don't treat them, you will have a good prognosis. No, if you don't treat them, you may have a bad prognosis. It may not really follow the prognostic line or a developmental curve which are explained by the GMFM. They are going to improve it if you do not treat them appropriately. So they are all three are interlinked with each other. So when it comes to a treatment, I can tell you I have 1,000 ways to treat them. I have weight bearing, which is very popular among us, which has no meaning actually. I have a hydrotherapy, I have a ball based, I have visual rehab, hydrotherapy, sensory based, treadmill based, standing frames, sensory based again, ball pool, oromotor stimulation, orthotic appliances, vestibular ball based exercises, bolster based exercises. I can name A to Z n number of therapies. But if I'm treating symptoms, I will go all over this. But if I'm treating diagnosis, I will be very, very specific to it. So to take home or to conclude and not to make you confused like how this child is confused in this slide, I would give you some clues which will mimic like a CP. One, don't miss the family history of consanguinity, unexplained neonatal or early infantile deaths, which have happened in the previous history. Always take the past medical history where there may be unexplained hypoglycemia, encephalopathies, protein aversions, recurrent vomiting, self-injurious behavior, or worsening seizures. And very important in therapist point of view is always see that whether your child is regressing what you have developed in that. That's the first sign for a therapist to understand that it is not a cerebral palsy. Because child with cerebral palsy is going to improve and maintain that improvement as the course of treatment goes on. It's not going to regress. It's not going to go the head control, lose the trunk control, lose the limb control and become a bedbound. It does not happen with cerebral palsy unless and until there are complicated seizure which does not get treated. That's very, 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 very important to be looked for as a therapist. and that alarms you to say that it is not going to be a CP. Another very important is whenever you see a child with hypotonia, please raise your doubt that it may not be CP, because usually we have been taught in our undergraduate is initially hypotonia, later on hypertonia. That is not the case in all the cases. Hypotonia, maybe global hypotonia, maybe because of n number of reasons. Hypotonic child itself is the biggest topic to be discussed. So if you have a hypotonia persistently remaining in the child, does not turn out to be spastic between 6 months to 9 months of the development, then please raise your concern, doubt that it may not be a developmental delay because of cerebral palsy. And please, very important is, as we say that if we are allowing some not to have a punished those who are really guilty, but we should not allow punishment those who are really true. Similarly, please, we should not miss a treatable cause which can be completely treated and made normal, particularly with dopamine responsives, some amount of untreated phenylketonurias, some deficiencies of the vitamins. They are treatable, completely treatable, and the child can get much better or completely normal. So we should not miss out these treatable causes. Apart from that, to take home is, let's fix it one thing in mind, that all motor developmental delays are not CP. Second, CP is one of the disorder in motor developmental delay, and not all the motor developmental delays are CP, which I told you in line 1. And if it is CP, I tell you for 100% sure they will improve with your interventions if they are appropriate, because it's a non-progressive. And as a therapist, you need to raise your suspicion the moment you see no changes with your interventions, or if you are seeing deterioration, though you are intervening them. And though you may contradict me on my point 5 and 6, I am saying that only treat with confirmed medical diagnosis. You may raise a question telling me that, sir, it's very difficult to get in a confirmed diagnosis, but at least go near to the confirmed diagnosis. I have a very good pediatric neurologist who helps me at every point of time, giving me a medical diagnosis and guiding me. I'm sure at every place they are available. But having said that, in my 15 years of practice, still I have a couple of cases which is not yet diagnosed. Okay, and always we think of 3% of the population, but don't miss genetic syndromes, which accounts almost 43% of the live births when they are affected. So don't miss them. So with this, what I want to say is that we have a lot of things now in our plate. And if you go to the restaurant, they say, which plate should I serve you? Sada thali chahiye ya bada thali chahiye ya chota thali chahiye? The answer for that is, you take it in your plate how much we need it. That means we sort out the things what we want to fill our stomach. Similarly, we need to sort out this particular diagnosis which fits to that child and which is true to that child. And then we intervene them with that which is required. That means it is not the quantity of food. Similarly, not the quantity of amount of treatment strategies are available. It is the quality of strategies which are improvement, which will be leading into the improvement, which are specific to the child, specific to the diagnosis, and not to the symptoms. With this, I hand over to the organizers to ask me if there are any queries, so we can answer those queries.
Hello, may I put up a question? Hello.
Sure.
Well, myself, Shelly. I'm residing at present in Bhopal. My nephew is there. He was a premature, actually he was born in the 29th week of pregnancy. So he is having spasticity in the the lower limb, that is his thighs. And at present he was born in June 2012. So he's moreover he's 8. But what we have seen is that is his scissor posture and everything changed. But still he's not able to walk. Doctors do claim, that as a physiotherapist, they say that actually he's not having the strength. So could you please throw light that as to where should we go? And he has been diagnosed, yes, as a CP, but just 5 to 8%. So could you please lead us through that? What should I do? What should we do now? Like,
Okay, it's a very commonest question, ma'am, what you're asking, which we go through.
yes, sir.
So there are two things to be looked for. Usually a child with cerebral palsy who is 8 years old, if it is a cerebral palsy, that's where I'm focusing today on.
That's why,
Okay.
sir.
Yeah, so what I would suggest is the first line is you meet a pediatric neurologist.
Fine, fine.
Okay.
He
Once-
was just to sorry to interfere. He was actually diagnosed at KEM Pune itself. Like we were there for the
Okay.
DQ. Actually.
Okay. So if it is diagnosed as a spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy, and
Yes.
if he's not showing in a progression after the intervention, I would again question the diagnosis. I would ask that
Fine.
we should reconsider the diagnosis and see
Fine.
where
Fine.
the things are going wrong. Now, as a
Fine.
therapist, they're saying that he does not have strength. And as you are saying that the child was developed at the month of third and you started with the therapy, usually it is the job of the therapist to be developing that strength. So I would consider that there is something needs to be reconsidered as a diagnosis, number one. Number
Yes.
two is we need to see the child and see whether we can give some amount of adaptive equipments which will help the child to develop a good posture, and we can facilitate some amount of movement. So what I would request you is that our organizers have their email IDs. You
Fine,
can
fine.
send the details of the child on the email. I will
Okay.
definitely look into that and take an opinion from my pediatric neurologist also. And
Mhm.
I will assure you that we'll come to a conclusion where your child is actually lacking and what we can do the
Fine,
best for.
fine. Just one more thing. Actually, he is touchwood. He is as normal, and he is in an that is a usual school, and he's in standard 3, and with
Okay.
good grades he is doing.
Yeah,
Just this motor aspect I am worried about.
That's what. So I am considering them as a motor developmental delay, but
Yes.
is it secondary to only cerebral palsy? Since looking at his cognitive component normal, I again raise a
Cognitively,
doubt because spastic quadris cognitively 98% of the spastic quadris with quadriplegic CP diagnosis will have some
Okay.
cognitive issues.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I still have a doubt on a diagnosis, ma'am. So I
Fine,
would
sir.
reconsider the diagnosis and see where we are missing him. So please send us the reports of him
Certainly.
so that we can look into that.
Okay.
I would request the organizers to take over the questions, please.
Yes, thank you so
sir.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanjay, for such a wonderful, informative webinar. There are a few questions that we have on Zoom. There's a question asked by Akshita Bhatt. Non-progressive are primary impairments caused due to CP. What about secondary impairments? Will it not limit our treatment plan?
Once we know the primary impairments, our role is not to allow to develop the secondary impairments. So treatment plan, when it is a CP, the treatment plan is fixed. The treatment plan has evidence. So if I give an example of, as I gave one of the example during the talk of hemiplegia, I will change the example to diplegia. So when I see a child with diplegia at the age of 8 months who is scissoring, I would fix up this child with a SWAS immediately, not to allow the secondary impairment in this child. So treatment strategies will change if you have not addressed the primary impairments appropriately. Point one. Point two is, I would focus that I do not allow this child to get into the secondary complications as much as I can. That is a point two. Point three is, you might say me that, okay, what if the child has come to the secondary complications to me? Then there is a protocol that if you have a child who is not responding to the therapy and having secondary complications which are surgically required intervention, I would suggest that go for that. Take an opinion from pediatric orthopedic surgeon and follow the guidelines of the treatment post-surgical. That's what I could answer this question.
Thank you so much, sir. So there's another question that we have. How long should we continue therapy for alternative diagnosis?
For alternative diagnosis, whenever the diagnosis is alternative, you need to really look into the literature for that. For example, the child which I showed you here with an Moyamoya syndrome, I follow him 3 times in a week because that's what a literature support I have. 1. 2, I would follow him for a development which I can get at least a trunk control to sit, but I will go more for an adaptive equipment for this child because I want the child to be supported 24/7. So I would immediately shift to the adaptive equipments and weekly thrice for that particular child. Now, once you see an alternative diagnosis, which is a cerebellar in nature or a cerebral in nature. If it is cerebral in nature, you can still follow the approaches which are used for cerebral palsy and see if there is an improvement. If there is no improvement in that, then classically you will have to follow a developmental approach, that is cephalocaudal, that develop the proximal control and then go for the distal control. So probably weekly 3 times for first 3 years of life, and immediately shift towards the adaptive equipment so that you can support the child and improve the quality of life, which is important in children who are progressive in nature, because you know the limitation that you really cannot get them back, but you can really give them a very good quality of life. Next question, please. Next question.
Hello, can you hear me, sir? Hello? Dr. Sanjay, can you hear me?
I think
Okay.
Dr. Sanjay's speaker is muted.
Yes.
Let's take a minute.
Yeah, I think he can hear me now.
I can hear you. I can
Yes,
hear
yes.
Yeah.
So we have one question from Alisha Jaiswal. Alisha, could you please unmute yourself and ask these questions? So her question is with respect to the slide on genetic variation test PCR. How can we differentiate that boy's case?
Can you please ask the
Hello.
question?
Hello, Alisha, can you please ask your question?
Ma'am, I want to know the proper diagnosis of CP.
Proper diagnosis of
Clinical
CP?
diagnosis.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So to diagnose the child with cerebral palsy, you need to have 3 things in your hand. One is that the child has a non-progressive damage in the early development of the brain. 2, the child should have a posture and movement dysfunction. And 3, it should be non-progressive in nature. So you will need a complete evaluation of the child as a routine evaluation. You will need a brain MRI, and you will need a pediatric neurologist consultation to confirm that the child is CP and otherwise not. So these are the 3 things which you need to keep in mind to say that the child is a cerebral palsy and not otherwise.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question that we have is again from Akshata Bhatt. Do you think surgical or Botox management affect therapy given by us, post muscle release, etc.?
Yeah, Botox, it is very important to understand when to give Botox. If you are giving the Botox in the early ages, you might land up in giving the Botox in the later ages also. So if you are giving the Botox between the age of, let's say, 3 to 5, once you have understood that your intervention is not making much changes. 1. Point 2, your pediatric neurologist will definitely prescribe antispastics for your child. And if that is also not helping, if these 2 things are not helping, then you may consider a Botox with a consent with the pediatric neurologist, and you sitting together and finding out on Tardieu scale whether your R1 is high or R2 is high. If your R1 is high, you may go for a Botox. It will help the child because there is an evidence, level 1 evidence, post-Botox therapy definitely works. So yes, our intervention will change post-Botox. We will be concentrating more on the muscle which is Botox because that's going to be again weak, and we are going to concentrate on the antagonist muscle of the Botox also. So probably electrical stimulation, muscle strengthening will be a cornerstone of the treatment post-Botox. And there are a lot of literature available post-Botox treatment also.
I hope we've answered your question. The next question that we have is from Priyal Jain. For young children who came to PICU for metabolic problems and a picture of reduced general movement of the limbs along with hyperreflexia, what treatment approach can be done?
When the child is in the PICU, the first thing and the foremost thing what physiotherapist needs to look for is get the vitals stable, because they are referring to you to getting their cardiorespiratory system into the control. So you need to look into the first, whether their vitals are stable, two, whether the child is suffering from pneumonia, which you needs to take care with your interventions, and third goes for a developmental intervention. So in PICU or NICU, what we do is, in NICU, we use a lot of kangaroo care and multimodal stimulation, which is based on the NIDCAP, which you can browse it and see how the NIDCAP or a kangaroo care works. Now, since your child is in PICU, I would suggest take care of respiratory system, one. Two, take care that how much you can facilitate the movement in the upper and lower extremities, so that the child comes out of the PICU and you can take this child on your therapy in your OPD, and then follow the developmental approach. As I said, cephalocaudal, because it's a metabolic disorder. And if you have a confirmed metabolic disorder with name, I would suggest the easy way is go on to the web, search the diagnosis, search the same diagnosis, and see if there is a literature available for that. Most of the disorders, I'm aware that the literature about physiotherapy is lacking. In that case, please follow a developmental pattern that is proximal to distal, cephalo to caudal pattern. That will help you a lot to develop this particular child. Thank you.
Participants, I think we will have to stop the question answer sessions here because of the time constraints. However, you're free to drop your questions on the chat box on Zoom and also on the comment section on Facebook and YouTube links. We will be answering all the questions on our second video and upload it on the other pages as well. Also, we have shared our email address on our chat box. Please kindly go through the email and ask all your queries. Thank you, Dr. Sanjay Parmar, for being with us here today and imparting knowledge and guiding all our physiotherapists. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Alisha and the team of Trio. And I want to thank my PGs who helped me through all this thing. And Dr. Mahesh Kamte, who was really a great helping hand for me to diagnose the cases and help them out. And as I say in my slide that alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. That's very true. It's not on a single, whenever a child comes with a developmental delay, it is not a job of one person, it is a job of the treatment, it is a job of the team. So we should work together to get the best result in our children's. And I thank the team Trio for giving me this opportunity. And all the participants who are present today, they can drop in their queries into the inbox. Also email us. We will try and have one more session where we try to answer your questions live. And I thank everyone present today and whole Trio team. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Participants, you can give your suggestions and also any future feedbacks or any other topics that you're looking ahead for future webinars. Also, we would like to thank Lakshita Jain, Krish Lodha, Alpit and Dr. Archit for being a strong support for technical support and making this function really smooth. And lastly, on Trio, I would like to thank all our participants for joining here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.